No Babysitter lasted with Billionaire's twin sons until a maid's daughter changed everything. You call yourself a genius, Anderson? Then tell me, how many nannies have quit this month? The voice sliced through the glass-walled boardroom like a knife. James Anderson didn't answer. He sat at the head of the mahogany table, the morning light glinting off his cufflinks, silver, cold, immaculate, just like his silence. Around him, the board members of Anderson Global laughed uneasily, eyes darting between the billionaire and the smug CFO who dared to provoke him. 5, another voice chimed in. Or was it 6? I lost count when the tabloids started calling your kids the Anderson Devils. Laughter, shallow, poisonous. James's hand tightened around his pen until it snapped. Ink bled onto the spotless financial report in front of him, an empire worth billions. He'd built it from nothing, yet he couldn't keep peace in a single home. Across the screen at the end of the room, a headline flashed from the morning press. No babysitter lasted with Billionaire's twin sons. Even the psychologist ran away. Below it, a photo. 2 boys, identical faces twisted in anger, throwing paint at a terrified nanny. James, the chairman said carefully, maybe it's time to consider institutional care, boarding school, something with discipline. The words hit harder than any financial loss. Boarding school, the polite way of saying, send them away. James rose slowly. The laughter died. His gaze swept across the room, men who feared market loss more than broken hearts. You can all leave, he said quietly. No one moved. Now. The door shut behind him with a soft click, sealing the world out. He walked down the mirrored hallway, his reflection fractured by light. Power, control, emptiness. 5 years since Eleanor's death, and the mansion that once echoed with laughter had become a war zone. 5 years since he'd promised her, I'll take care of them. He'd built towers for the world, but walls for his sons. As he stepped into the waiting elevator, James whispered to his reflection, maybe I can buy everything except their hearts. And for the first time in years, the billionaire didn't look invincible. He looked lost, hopelessly, terrifyingly lost. The Anderson estate stood like a monument to victory, 30,000 square feet of marble and glass perched above the Pacific cliffs. From afar, it looked like a dream. Up close, it felt like a cage. Inside, the silence was almost holy, a symphony of ticking clocks, automatic lights, and footsteps echoing down endless corridors. Everything gleamed, the grand piano polished daily, though no one had played it in years. The crystal chandeliers, the white orchids replaced every Monday by unseen hands. But there was no sound of laughter. Not anymore. James Anderson walked through the marble foyer, his tailored suit cutting a sharp figure beneath the golden light. His eyes, steel gray, calculating, once frightened competitors in boardrooms across the globe. Now they only reflected exhaustion. He passed the family portrait by the staircase. Eleanor, his late wife, smiled from the canvas, her auburn hair captured in soft brushstrokes, her arms wrapped around 2 infants. The artist had painted the glow of joy, but the real woman, 5 years gone, had taken that glow with her. Down the hall, a crash shattered the silence. Owen, stop it! I didn't do anything. You're always blaming me. James froze. His sons, 6-year-old twins, identical yet opposite, were at it again. He found them in the playroom, a war zone of toppled toys and shattered glass. Leo, the elder by 2 minutes, stood trembling beside a fallen model rocket. His fingers shook. a faint neurological tremor the doctors called minor. To Leo, it felt like failure. Owen, his mirror image, clenched his fists, his face red with anger. James took one step forward. Instantly both boys fell silent, not from respect, but fear. "I told you," James said quietly. "No more fighting." Owen's lip quivered. "You don't even know what happened." "Enough." The single word ended the argument. When he left the room, both boys stared after him, neither angry nor sad, just hollow. Outside, in the garden, Sarah Carter, the housekeeper, was trimming roses. 40 years old, calm, precise, a woman who believed silence solved more than words. She'd worked for James since Eleanor's passing, holding the house together with quiet loyalty. Beside her knelt her daughter, Emily, 11 years old, a small girl with sunlight in her hair and questions in her eyes. She was tracing shapes in the soil with a stick, patterns that looked like constellations. "Mom," Emily said softly, "why does the house feel sad?" Sarah sighed, not looking up. "Because sometimes money builds walls, not homes." From the window above, James watched them without realizing why. Something about the little girl's calmness caught his attention. She didn't belong to this world of servants and orders. She belonged somewhere freer, yet she seemed perfectly at peace. That night, after the twins refused dinner again, James sat alone at the long dining table, a table for 12, occupied by one. The ticking of the grandfather clock was louder than breathing. He stared at the untouched plate and muttered, "Everything in this house runs on schedule, except life." Later, he found Sarah cleaning the kitchen. Emily was sitting nearby, sketching on a torn notepad. She looked up as he entered. "You're Mr. Anderson, right?" she asked. He nodded, surprised by the directness. "And you must be Sarah's daughter." "Yes, sir. Emily?" She studied him for a long moment. "You look like someone who doesn't sleep." James blinked. "Excuse me? My grandpa says people who don't sleep are usually fighting ghosts." A pause. Then she smiled, gentle, almost pitying. "Maybe you just miss someone." Before he could answer, Sarah called her away, but the words stayed. Fighting ghosts. In the quiet that followed, James realized the house didn't just echo. It haunted. Every hallway, every room still held Eleanor's voice, her laughter, her lullabies. He'd spent 5 years trying to replace what was gone, with money, order, rules. But what his children needed wasn't control, it was connection. And in the soft light of that empty kitchen, he wondered, for the first time, if salvation could really come from something as small as a child's question. By Tuesday morning, the mansion was in chaos again. The new babysitter, James's 15th hire in 6 months, was screaming, "Mr. Anderson, I can't do this anymore. They locked me in the pantry." James came downstairs still in his suit, phone in hand. The young woman burst from the kitchen covered in flour, her eyes wide with tears. "They threw eggs at me. They said their father was too busy to care." She fled past him, nearly colliding with the chauffeur. The front door slammed so hard it rattled the crystal chandelier. James stood in silence as his sons peeked from behind the banister, 2 small silhouettes watching to see what he would do. He didn't shout. He didn't even look at them. He just walked back toward his office and said flatly, "Sarah, clean this up." The words landed like stones. By afternoon, the tabloids had the story. Anderson twins strike again. Billionaire's children terrorize another nanny. Stock tickers flashed the headline beside the Anderson Global logo. The media loved it. The powerful man who could buy everything but peace in his own home. And that was when Charlotte Davis arrived. James's older sister, perfectly dressed in pearl white silk, walked into the living room as if she owned it. Her voice carried the kind of authority that came from money and judgment. "James," she sighed, "do you know what people are saying about our family?" He didn't answer. "They're calling your children monsters. And honestly, can you blame them?" He looked up slowly. "They're 6, Charlotte. 6 or 60, it doesn't matter. They're out of control. You need real discipline, structure. Send them to St. Thomas Academy. They'll fix this." "I'm not sending them away." Her lips curved in a sharp smile. "You already have, emotionally." The words pierced deeper than she intended. That evening, James stood outside the twins' room. He heard them whispering through the door. "Do you think Mom would have stayed?" Owen asked quietly. Leo didn't answer. The tremor in his small hands returned as he traced patterns on the bedsheet. James turned away before they could notice him. He went to his study, poured whiskey into a glass, and stared at the city lights below. He'd fought corporate sharks, survived mergers and betrayals, but nothing compared to this silence between him and his children. For the first time, he wondered if Charlotte was right. Downstairs, in the dim kitchen, Sarah was washing dishes. Emily sat at the table, swinging her legs, watching her mother. "Mom," she asked softly, "why does Mr. Anderson always look like he's about to cry, but never does?" Sarah frowned. "Emily, don't say things like that. He's our employer." "But he's lonely." The girl's voice was matter-of-fact, not pitying. "His house is too big for one person's heart." Sarah smiled tiredly. "You're too young to think about hearts." "I'm not thinking," Emily said. "I'm listening." She pointed upward, toward the faint sound of shouting from the twins' room. "That's not anger," she whispered. "That's 2 kids calling for help in the only language they know." Sarah froze. The words reminded her of her father, Emily's great-grandfather, who'd once said the same thing about soldiers after war. Later that night, James passed the kitchen again on his way to the gym. He heard Emily humming softly, the tune hauntingly familiar, Eleanor's Lullaby. He stopped in the doorway. "Where did you learn that song?" he asked quietly. Emily looked up. "My grandpa used to sing it. He said it came from a sailor who lost someone at sea." James felt the air leave his lungs. Eleanor sang that to the twins. The girl tilted her head. "Maybe your house just needs music again." James wanted to speak but couldn't. He only nodded and walked away. Behind him, Emily whispered to her mother, "He doesn't need a babysitter, Mom. He needs an anchor." Upstairs, Leo sat awake, staring at the stars through his window. His little hands trembled as he whispered, "Mom, we're trying. We really are." Owen, pretending to be asleep, clenched his fists and muttered, "Nobody sees us." But someone did. A small girl with golden hair and quiet courage had just seen what no adult could. And before the week was over, she would change everything. That night, the mansion didn't sleep. Rain streaked across the high windows, thunder rumbling somewhere beyond the cliffs. James sat alone in his study, the glow of the city shimmering through the glass walls behind him. In his hand lay an old photograph, creased, almost forgotten. It was taken 30 years ago. A skinny boy stood beside a rusted pickup, grease on his cheeks, pride in his eyes. Behind him, a hand-painted sign, Anderson Auto Repairs. The boy was him. In those days, the Andersons weren't rich. They weren't even comfortable. James's father worked 12 hours a day fixing engines. His mother cleaned offices at night. Their house was small, their dreams smaller, but their laughter filled every corner. At 15, James had hands scarred from tools and heart bruised from humiliation. The rich kids at school mocked his oil-stained clothes. He'd promised himself he'd never be small again, never be powerless. One night, when he came home from his part-time job, he found his father asleep at the table, still holding a wrench. His mother whispered, "Your father says money doesn't buy happiness, but maybe it buys rest." James never forgot that. That line became his creed. Work until no one can hurt you again. Years later, at a university fundraiser he attended on scholarship, he met Eleanor Price, the daughter of one of the donors, radiant and fearless. She saw through his armor before he even knew he was wearing it. "You look like someone who wants to fix everything," she'd teased. He'd smirked. "Isn't that better than breaking things?" "Not if you forget how to live while fixing," she said. Eleanor was light where he was steel. She taught him poetry, silence, laughter. They married young. The wedding photo, still hanging in the hall, captured the exact moment she whispered, "Promise me, when the storms come, you'll remember to anchor yourself in love, not in fear." 5 years later, she was gone. A car crash, a rainy night, a phone call that turned empires to ashes. James hadn't cried at the funeral. He'd stood like a statue, clutching her ring in his palm until it drew blood. After that, the house stopped breathing. Far away from skyscrapers and fortune, a little girl in a modest neighborhood was listening to stories of the ocean. Emily Carter, age 8, sat on her great-grandfather's porch while the wind played with her hair. Sergeant Elias Vance, a retired naval veteran, sat in his worn armchair, his voice low and steady. "Every ship has a compass, Emily," he told her, "but it's the anchor that keeps it from drifting." She frowned. "What if it loses the anchor? Then it drifts till it breaks? People are the same." He taught her to carve tiny wooden anchors, saying each one carried a lesson: patience, courage, mercy. He made her promise to use them not for decoration, but for people. When he passed away 2 years later, Emily kept one of those anchors in her pocket. Sometimes she held it tight whenever she saw someone lost. The storm outside the Anderson mansion grew stronger. James finally set the photograph down. He stood, restless, and walked toward the nursery, the room Eleanor had painted in pale blue before the twins were born. Dust covered the toys. The rocking chair still creaked when the wind slipped through the window crack. He touched the edge of the crib and whispered, "You'd know what to do, Ellie. I don't." Then, faintly, he heard humming. He followed the sound down the hall. It came from the kitchen. Emily again, helping her mother clean up the dinner plates. She was humming the same lullaby Eleanor used to sing, the same soft rhythm of ocean waves. When she noticed him, she stopped. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know you were there." James shook his head slowly. "Where did you learn that song?" She hesitated. "My great-grandpa. He said sailors sang it to keep storms away." He smiled for the first time in weeks. "Did it work?" She shrugged. "Depends on the sailor." He chuckled, a sound so unfamiliar it startled them both. Before going to bed, Emily looked out the window toward the restless sea and whispered, "Grandpa, I found a man who's lost his anchor, but maybe he still has a map." In his study, James couldn't sleep. He kept replaying her words. Lost his anchor. He looked around at the polished steel shelves, the trophies, the awards, the empty whiskey glass. His empire had been built on control, yet his life was collapsing under it. Finally, he walked to the window, where the Pacific waves smashed against the rocks below. The moonlight shimmered like a heartbeat across the surface. In the reflection, he saw not a billionaire, not a father, just a man who'd forgotten how to listen. He whispered into the dark, "If anchors keep ships steady, maybe love was mine." And somewhere in the distance, the storm began to fade. The morning after the storm was unnaturally still. Fog drifted across the Anderson estate, softening the harsh marble lines into something almost gentle. In the kitchen, Emily sat on a stool eating toast while her mother polished silverware. Her golden hair was tied in a loose braid, eyes quietly alert as always. James entered, still half distracted by the reports on his tablet. The moment she saw him, Emily slid off the stool and stood straight. "Good morning, Mr. Anderson," she said, her tone polite but unafraid. He nodded absently. "Morning." Then, without thinking, she added, "Your house feels lighter today." He paused. "Lighter?" "The rain washed away the noise," she said. "Sometimes storms do that." There was something disarming in the way she said it, not like a child guessing, but like someone who understood storms too well. That afternoon, the twins were fighting again, this time over a broken toy robot. "You broke it!" Owen shouted. "I didn't." Leo's voice cracked. "It's shaking because of my hand." "You're lying." James was about to step in when Emily appeared at the doorway. She didn't yell. She simply sat down on the carpet, picked up the broken robot, and examined it. She murmured. "You know, my great-grandpa used to say machines are like people. They stop working when they feel unloved." The twins blinked, confused. "Maybe it's not broken," Emily continued. "Maybe it just forgot how to move." She pulled a screwdriver from her pocket, something she always carried for her small projects, and began fixing it, humming softly. Within minutes, the robot whirred to life again, wobbling across the floor. Leo gasped. Owen laughed. For the first time in months, the sound of laughter reached James's ears without bitterness. Emily looked up at them. "See? You don't have to fight to fix things. You just have to sit still long enough to understand them." The words weren't directed at James, yet they pierced straight through him. Later that evening, James found her in the garden, tying a string around a small stick and planting it in the dirt. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Building a fort," she said simply. "But not just for me. For them, too." He frowned. "You mean my sons?" "Yes. They need a place that feels safe, not perfect, just theirs." James crossed his arms, half amused, half skeptical. "You think you can do that?" Emily met his gaze, steady and calm. "I don't think. I'll try." Then, after a beat, she added, "Give me 1 week. I don't want to be their babysitter. I want to be their friend. Let me stay, not to control them, but to listen." James hesitated. The logical part of him screamed impossible. But another voice, fainter, older, more human, whispered, "What do you have left to lose?" He sighed. 1 week? Her face lit up, not with excitement, but quiet determination. "Thank you, sir." That night, as he passed by the twins' room, James saw something strange. The boys were building something. Pillows, blankets, chairs, all stacked in a dome shape. In the center sat Emily, holding a flashlight. She looked up, smiling. "We're making a fortress," she said. "A safe place, no adults allowed unless they promise not to give orders." For a long moment, James stood in the doorway. His sons were laughing, laughing. The sound was foreign, almost shocking. He didn't say a word. He simply leaned against the doorframe and watched, the corners of his lips lifting slightly. Inside that fortress of pillows, lit by the dim glow of a flashlight, something had begun to heal. And for the first time since Eleanor's death, James Anderson didn't feel like a stranger in his own house. For the first time in years, the Anderson mansion was alive. The fortress of pillows had grown into an empire of laughter. Every morning, the twins waited by the stairs for Emily, ready with wild new ideas. They built ships from cardboard boxes, castles from cushions, and a mini museum in the sunroom where they displayed seashells and drawings. James watched quietly from afar. He still worked, still read reports and signed contracts, but now he came home early. Some evenings, he even left his phone in the car. "Dinner, boys?" Sarah would call. "Coming." Both voices would echo, words she hadn't heard in years. It was peace, fragile and new. Peace never lasts long in the homes of the rich. Charlotte Davis swept into the mansion like a gust of perfume and disapproval. Her diamond earrings flashed as sharply as her voice. What in heaven's name happened to this place? She stared in horror at the living room, blankets draped over furniture, toys scattered across Persian rugs, a half-built robot on the marble floor. "Are we living in a kindergarten, James?" James smiled faintly. "Maybe, and for once I don't mind." Charlotte turned toward the garden where Emily and the twins were kneeling in the dirt, planting marigolds. "Who is that?" she demanded. "Sarah's daughter," James said. "She's been helping the boys." Charlotte's eyes narrowed. "Helping? You're letting a maid's child raise your heirs?" James's voice cooled. "She's done more for them in a week than 10 professionals in a year." Charlotte scoffed. "James, you're blinded by guilt. Those boys need control, not chaos." He turned away. "They need love." But Charlotte didn't leave. She stayed and waited. It happened 2 days later. James was at the company preparing for a major charity launch. Charlotte remained at the mansion, supervising. In the grand hall stood a priceless Ming Dynasty vase, Eleanor's favorite. At noon, a scream echoed through the house. Charlotte clutched her arm, the vase shattered at her feet. "They threw the ball at me," she cried. "Those boys, they're wild animals." Leo froze, pale and stammering. "We didn't. We were playing in the hall, but—" Owen shouted, "It wasn't us." Emily rushed forward. "Aunt Charlotte, that's not what—" "Enough," Charlotte snapped. "You're covering for them. How convenient. The servant's child defends the master's brats." James arrived minutes later, fury burning in his eyes. He saw the broken vase, the crying aunt, and his terrified sons. "Emily," he said quietly, "take your mother and go home." The room fell silent. "Mr. Anderson," Sarah began, but he cut her off. "I said go." Emily's lip trembled, but she nodded. "Yes, sir." Leo burst into tears. "Please don't make her go, Dad, please." But James turned away. His voice broke on the last word. "Enough." The fortress fell. Hours later, the mansion was silent again. Too silent. The twins refused dinner. Owen threw his plate. Leo sat by the window, eyes empty. James walked into the study, every step heavier than the last. On his desk lay his phone, still flashing notifications. Among them, a motion alert from the security system. He pressed play. On the screen, Charlotte's image appeared. She was alone in the hall, deliberately tipping the vase, then splashing water onto herself before the boys even entered the frame. James's chest tightened. His breath came sharp, ragged. He replayed it 3 times just to be sure. Then he whispered, "What have I done?" He didn't tell anyone. He didn't even grab his jacket. Within minutes, he was behind the wheel, the city lights streaking past like ghosts. Rain fell again, just like the night Eleanor died. When he reached Sarah's modest home, he saw Emily sitting on the porch under a blanket, clutching a small wooden anchor. She looked up, eyes calm but sad. "You found out." He stopped short. "You knew?" "I guessed. Some people need to break something to prove they're still in control." James exhaled shakily. "Emily, I'm sorry. I let my pride speak louder than my heart." She studied him, then smiled softly. "You're listening now. That's a start." He crouched beside her. "Will you come back?" "Not as your employee," she said gently. "As their friend, if you'll let me." He nodded. "Please." The next morning, when the twins woke, their father was waiting by the door. "Get dressed," he said. "We've got something to build." In the living room, the pillows and blankets waited. Emily stood beside them, smiling shyly. Leo blinked. "You came back?" "Only if you two promised to help," she teased. They built again, not just a fortress, but a family. James crawled on the floor beside them, holding the flashlight this time. When it was done, he whispered, "Permission to enter?" Owen laughed. "Only if you don't give orders." He ducked inside. The 3 of them sat beneath the glowing roof of pillows, their laughter echoing through marble halls once silent as a tomb. Days later, James stood at the company's charity event. But it wasn't his usual speech about profits. He unveiled a new foundation, the Eleanor Project, community gardens and workshops for children with disabilities. When reporters asked why, he simply said, "Because every child deserves a place to plant their roots." Back home, he knelt in the garden with Leo and Owen, helping them plant the first rosebush. His suit was ruined, his hands dirty, his heart light. As Emily watched from the porch, Sarah whispered, "You did this." Emily shook her head. "No, ma'am, he did. I just reminded him where to look." That night, James tucked the twins into bed for the first time in years. When Leo's small, trembling hand gripped his, he didn't pull away. Owen whispered, "Dad, are you going to stay?" James smiled. "I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time since Eleanor's passing, the house slept peacefully, not because it was silent, but because it finally breathed again. The news broke 3 days later. Every media outlet in the city carried the headline, "Charlotte Davis Exposed. Footage reveals fabricated scandal in Anderson Mansion." The leaked video, quiet, grainy, undeniable, showed everything. Charlotte alone in the hallway, tipping the vase, staging her accident. Within hours, her reputation crumbled. Business partners withdrew. Her husband, humiliated, released a statement calling her actions regrettable. For the first time, the woman who prided herself on control faced the public's cold judgment. Reporters camped outside the Anderson estate, hungry for a statement. James stood at the gates, cameras flashing in his face. "Mr. Anderson," one shouted, "how do you respond to your sister's actions? Will you press charges?" James looked calm, almost peaceful. He wore no tie, his sleeves rolled up, soil still under his fingernails from that morning's gardening with the boys. He spoke slowly, every word clear and heavy. "I've learned something," he began. "Control without compassion destroys everything it touches. My sister forgot that, and so did I, for a long time." He paused, the silence between questions stretching like a held breath. "I don't hate her. I hope she finds peace, because anger is just another kind of prison." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The statement went viral in hours. Forgiveness from the man she betrayed. Commentators called it the most human thing a billionaire ever said. That evening, Charlotte arrived unannounced. She stood at the gate, no makeup, no jewelry, just a trembling woman stripped of power. James met her outside, the twilight soft on his face. "James," her voice cracked, "I lost everything." He studied her, not with anger, but weary kindness. "You still have a brother." Tears filled her eyes. "How can you say that after what I did?" "Because someone once forgave me when I didn't deserve it." Behind them, laughter drifted from the garden, the twins and Emily chasing fireflies under the lanterns. Charlotte turned toward the sound, eyes softening. "They sound like her," she whispered. "Yes," James said quietly. "They do." She nodded, defeated, yet somehow lighter, and walked away into the night. As the last trace of sunset faded behind the cliffs, James lingered at the garden gate. The sea breeze carried the faint scent of roses and earth. He realized then that forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was the final proof of strength. And for the first time in his life, James Anderson didn't just own peace. He was peace. 6 months later, the Anderson mansion no longer felt like marble and silence. The air smelled of soil and sunlight. Laughter drifted from the garden, where rows of roses, marigolds, and small fruit trees now grew in neat, messy harmony. What was once a display of wealth had become a playground of life. James knelt beside the twins, sleeves rolled up, dirt under his nails, helping Leo press a seedling into the ground. "Careful," he said gently. "Roots first. Always give them room to grow." Owen grinned. "Like us?" James smiled. "Exactly like you." The boys laughed and splashed each other with the watering can. For a moment, the world shrank to this. Mud, laughter, sunlight, and the faint hum of the sea below the cliffs. From the porch, Emily watched, a notebook clutched against her chest. She looked older somehow, not in years, but in peace. When James waved, she walked over, her shoes sinking softly into the damp soil. "You've changed this place," he said. She shook her head. "No, you did. I just showed you where to dig." James chuckled. "I suppose you did." He handed her a small, neatly wrapped package. "For you," he said. "Consider it a thank you." Inside was a leather-bound journal embossed with a single word in gold: Angkor. She opened it. The first page carried a handwritten note. "For the girl who reminded a king that the greatest empire is a family. J.A." Emily smiled through quiet tears. "You didn't have to." "I know," James replied softly, "but gratitude deserves a home, too." As the afternoon light mellowed into gold, the twins tugged at their father's hands. "Come on, Dad. We still have one more tree to plant." They ran toward the edge of the garden where the cliff met the horizon. The last sapling waited, a young oak, small but strong. Together they dug the hole. The earth was cool and damp. As they lowered the roots in, James whispered, "For your mother." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt and roses. Emily placed her wooden anchor beside the tree, her quiet blessing. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Leo reached out and took Emily's hand. "Do you think it'll grow tall?" he asked. Emily smiled. "Only if we remember to water it with kindness." That evening, as the sun melted into the ocean, the Anderson estate stood transformed. Not a fortress, not a museum, but a living heart. And on its gate, freshly carved in bronze, gleamed a single line, "Anchored in love."